Good evening. I'm Jessie Gray. The program is Books. Thank you for joining us. The book this evening that we're going to discuss is Nobody Makes Me Cry by Shelley List. Thank you for coming this evening, Shelley.
Thank you.
Saturday Review Press published it. It's an excellent book. Before we begin, I'd like to read a quote of yours. You say, and the book is about this, there are women who believe their 40s to be a centering time, a time where everything starts fitting together, emotionally, professionally, sexually, and finally. This is what your book is about, is it not? Can you describe it briefly?
Yes, the book is about two divorced women who are in their 40s. One is in her early 40s. She's 43 years old. And she's a Catholic woman who had been married for almost 20 years to one man and had only known that one man emotionally and sexually her whole life. She married him at 18. At 43, she decides to get a divorce and to see what's out there in the world. She decides, yes, to get the divorce. In their relationship, she had essentially been the stronger of the two. My other character, Deborah, is 49 years old. She's Jewish, terrified of becoming 50, absolutely terrified. A woman who is alone, whose children are away, whose husband has left her for a young woman, a woman who has had nothing else but her looks and her feelings of confidence that came from her beauty, which is now waning. And she drinks because of her desperateness of that terrible magic number to her, which is 50. What I deal with in the book really is how they cope or don't cope with the 40s, the onset of the 50s, and being alone.
The age of 40 in 1975,
That's
too.
right.
Right.
That's right.
Now, another of your characters in the book, there are more women of this age. Lolly, in Nobody Makes Me Cry, says, I've got so many feelings now. And Lolly is happily married to a husband who loves her dearly and whom she loves. Mm-hmm. And she has security. Yet she also says, it's important that I settle it now that I've turned 40. Mm-hmm. Settle what?
I think women, and men too, especially, have this, there is something about 40 that's an arrival time. In other words, it's what were our goals that we set out to do early in life? If we haven't gotten there by 40, if we haven't really achieved something that we wanted to do in our idealistic 20s and so on, people get very hopeless. There is a turning point about 40. Men go through middle-age crises. Men leave wives of 25 and 30 years, 20 years, and go off with a young girl to find whatever that emptiness is that they see is arriving at 40. Where am I? Is what they feel,
Do you think this is a pressure due to society or physiology? Both?
Both. Absolutely both.
A woman said to me, women,
yes, a woman said to me the other day, she said, my body has betrayed me. This is a woman who's gotten huge and fat. And I didn't say it, but her body didn't betray her. She allowed herself to get very fat. A woman in her late 40s. Now, it's true that as we grow older, the things that are absolutely worshipped in society today, which is youth and beauty, everything becomes lower. We live in a society where breasts should be high and buttocks should be high and our faces should be high and that we should always look sort of young and vital. And this is what Hollywood tells us, this is what television tells us, this is what advertising tells us. We should be young and constantly beautiful, It just doesn't work that way.
Well, it's a youth-oriented society.
Absolutely.
However, there is a valid point that one ages, the closer one gets to 40, 50, 60, one's body does deteriorate.
There's no question about it.
And of course, we all face death. So that there is a legitimate reason for fear to certain people too, I would presume.
Well, that's interesting that you say that. I think that's really part of it. I think it is a form of death. I think that's really what worries people. It becomes closer. It comes closer to them as they see signs of deterioration in a body that they had so taken for granted before, you know. And I think that's really, really very true. I spoke to a women's group recently, and they said, and I was talking about how myself personally, my being 45 now, and feeling indeed that it is the prime of my life. I mean, I wouldn't be 20 again, as my daughter is, for anything.
I wouldn't either.
It was a difficult, painful, searching, yearning kind of time. But so this woman said to me in an audience, and she said, well, it's all right for you, you look all right for your age. And I said, and I'd never said it or thought of it out loud before. I said, all of us have a specter in the back of us, and it's a form of death. My specter is Shirley Booth in Come Back, Little Sheba, wearing Burt Lancaster's bathrobe, an old man's bathrobe, slopping around the kitchen floor with the blue mules, with the dishes in the sink, and the cat food all over the floor, and her hair all, the point, just letting go, just letting herself corset off, and that's my specter, in a sense. That's my form of death, in a sense. It's why, personally, what keeps me sort of going is that's, I don't want that to happen, and I think it could happen to any of us. Well, letting go like that.
I agree. Not only letting go, but do you think that the 40s is a reassessment time because we have to base our own opinion and ego on perhaps something more than looks? We have to find a different center because we're going to need it. And as we look ahead, we try to prepare for that time when we will have to base it on something besides looks, especially true for women, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. It's really one of the points I'm making in the book, that, and it's a plea for it, that women, especially women, should try to find and search for that center as early as possible. Early as possible. Do you know that marriage and a loved one and children is a part of life? But essentially, it's our core that is going to be with us forever, and that's the most important
And
thing.
without that, we indeed will not, emotionally at least, survive
I don't think so.
Our later years very successfully, or at least very happily, perhaps.
I don't think so. I think my two characters are really at two opposite ends of the same pole. Mary Catherine is a survivor, that no matter what happens to her.
This is the character who is 43 and
Yes.
chose to divorce her husband.
Chose to divorce and takes a route, takes a sexual route in the first year of her divorce, where she experiments, she has goes absolutely non-discriminatory in a sense with her sexual partners. But I use it as a kind of a metaphor for her exploration of that world out there. She keeps saying, I am intact. Somehow, no matter what she does, one senses she still has a core of herself and a hold on herself. And you sense, I think, that she will survive. Deborah is something else because she has never found her center, really. And she retreats into alcohol,
Yes.
and runs away from whatever pain is going to be there. And we can't do that, I don't think. We really can't run away from our pain. Unfortunately, we would divine if we
I
could.
think it follows people. Mary Catherine, in Nobody Makes Me Cry, the survivor, in exploring her sexuality really for the first time since with her husband in your book, Nobody Makes Me Cry, she certainly didn't find a very satisfactory relationship. He was impotent and less drunk.
Right.
She says to Deborah, the one who doesn't survive, that it's Doris Lessing's liberated ladies can only have orgasms with men they love, that there's no truth to it. Our bodies are limitless. She says, my sexuality is total and really independent of love, although I'm sure it would be heightened by love. Do you think that that's always been a myth for women, that they must have love
Yeah. I think
to
it is
complete their sexuality, whereas men have always had the sexuality and love separated? Do you think it is equally?
I think there are some women who can function as we have expected men to. I think some women have sexual drives and sexual needs that have to be satisfied, and that can be with or without love, you know. But I think the myth has been perpetuated, and certainly what I was quoting from was Doris Lessing's Golden Notebooks, where these were liberated ladies. This is 12 years ago when she did the Golden Notebooks, and these were communist ladies in London, and very liberated and making their own livings, and really totally hung up with the men that they were involved with. And several of them saying that they could only find sexual fulfillment with the men that they loved, although they were, you know, quote unquote promiscuous women for that, certainly at that time.
So that
I don't think
they had to emotionally involve themselves, perhaps talk themselves into it, if nothing else, to have a relationship. Whereas your character doesn't feel that it is necessary. She finds out that it isn't and explodes that myth, at least for herself. She says, I think I could go to bed with anyone. I sense in myself a whole non-discriminating thing.
Yes, and that's a woman who was convent-bred, who was, you know, brought up with a Catholic credo, who had been brought up to really accept that she would only be with one man for the rest of her life. So that for her to accept this, and it's partly the women's liberation movement, it's partly the media that is, I think, affecting all women at this time. I think the women's movement, in a sense, is really not accommodating itself to women in the 40s. I think Mary Catherine could...
In what way?
Well, I think there are many women in their 40s or early 50s that can't handle that kind of reasoning, because they were, you know, all of us were brought up with a, you know, you meet a man, you don't go to bed before you get married or whatever, and you have a very traditional kind of life, you know, 20,
now,
40.
do you think that all women were brought up that way, or something regressed, and the 20s were almost a freer time?
Right.
Then the people born in the 30s grew up again the values shifted back into a more restrictive.
I think so. Certainly members of certain religious, you know, groups and so on. But Mary Catherine stays whole through it. Which is
and indeed, she's able to analyze herself and find out when or if she might be teetering on a brink,
right, and
know what her limits are.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't seem to find any, but she...
No.
Now, what are the emotional issues I let you answer that a divorced woman must face? Namely, you mentioned loneliness.
Yes. Someone said something to me the other night. I quoted to a friend, I said, in my book I have a line, which is a quote from Anais Nin, where she says, loneliness is next to madness. And my friend said, I don't think that's true. She said, it's the fear of loneliness that's next to madness. And I thought to myself, that really makes sense in a way. Because when people are lonely, they are involved in it, in a sense. And it's painful, but it's the fear of being alone, I think, that is so terrifying to so many people. I think with Deborah, with my character, she's ready to marry someone who absolutely repels her. You know, 4'5" and round, and you know, and this huge fat man on top of her, which she is willing to do that in order not to be alone. And it's that fear of being alone. And I think in our culture, we're not brought up to be alone.
I see exactly what you mean, but don't you think there is such a thing as genuine loneliness?
Oh, no question about it.
Having no one who does care for you, or no one whom you are able to care for, which is just as important.
No question about it. I think, you know, New York is I think the loneliest place I have ever been. I've never seen so many people anywhere who talk to themselves on the streets as much as they do in the city. You know, and I think these are people who literally have nobody to talk to.
So that they literally have to project.
Well, that's true.
Another person.
And I think that's what I'm talking about in the book, is how does one cope with loneliness if one isn't prepared for it? You know, I brought up two children. You try to teach children how to just go into their room and sit quietly and to read or listen to music or whatever.
Again, to develop some kind of
a
resource
core
which they can fall back on.
That's right.
And also learn that perhaps reaching out and giving is a cure for loneliness too, no matter
Absolutely.
to what object you give to.
Mm-hmm.
Marriages you have, again, in your book, and this is Mary Catherine saying it, in Nobody Makes Me Cry, marriages don't last because people get bored with each other, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but 6 or 7 years, and the people are tired of each other. Then she says, I don't get tired of my kids. I always love them. It changes as they change. I change, but it grows.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible for people to have love, stay married, evolve, do you believe, together?
I think it's very rare. I am a product of a marriage, it's almost 50 years. And my father is still chasing my mother around the room. I mean, that's a metaphor, obviously, but they're still very involved with each other. Now, they're married almost 49 years, you know. So I have this model in front of me, in a sense, and it's a very volatile marriage, and it's, you know, all kinds of emotions constantly. But it stayed alive. My father met my mother when she was 14 years old. That's the age of my daughter, you know. I mean, you know, and you sort of, we talk about this often, you know.
What made it stay alive? Your parents' marriage, do you believe? As opposed to so many marriages you see which are either dead.
I think it was a different time. I mean, my mother facetiously has said to me, well, you know, you have to go through a depression together to stay together. Now, times are very tough now. You know, it's not as bad as it was in the 30s in the Depression. I don't know. I don't know what it is that keeps, whatever it is, I don't see people being able to do it as much today. I mean, do you know many sort of young people who have good, firm, strong marriages?
I know several. I know just as many who don't
Right.
and who stay married as I do who would have good marriages. I do believe there are such things. Of course, every marriage would have a good and bad periods.
I think
But
it's
there's
the ultimate challenge. I really do. I really do think, I mean, I believe in marriage, but I think I would call it the ultimate challenge.
Well, now,
really.
Mary Catherine says, I want to love someone, but I want to be free. I want to trust first. She's still looking.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes on to say she has not found anyone who, and this the title of the book, Nobody Makes Me Cry.
Mm-hmm.
She has found no one who did.
Right.
Does she want to get married again? She misses something, does she not?
Mm-hmm. And this is a woman who has a career, who earns a living for herself, gets great satisfaction from her child. Sure, there's something missing. I think.
What is it?
I think the depth of a relationship, the being able to give. I think it's a corny word, but it's a kind of a spiritual commitment to somebody. I think that's the thing that really makes us different from any other kind of being, you know. And I think that's really what she senses. That's the emptiness inside of her.
Do you yourself believe that there is such a thing as love?
If there is such a thing as love, I think there are all different kinds of love. The first thing that comes to my mind when you
conventional.
Well, it's funny because the first thing that comes to my mind when you say that is that I've been a journalist for a long time, and I've done a lot of stories on drug addiction and alcoholism and so on. And as part of a whole series that I was doing once, I went to a lot of closed AA meetings. And I don't think I've ever in my whole life seen as much evidence of love as I have, even between two people or a relationship or parents and children, as I did in AA meetings of people who had all been on the bottom who were then helping each other.
Which is why you say, similar
that's a
to your
special
parents,
kind of love.
you haven't been through the Depression together. Do you think that?
I think I have something to do with it. I really do. I have a very pragmatic approach to it. That might sound
Is it
terrible.
also I would imagine in AA meetings, I've never been to one, it would also be a complete trust that you can expose yourself to the other person and not be rejected, number one, which is very hard to do. And perhaps knowing that you're cared for. Would that be part of what you saw there?
I think so. I think that fear of abandonment is involved in many relationships between men and women, you know. Fear of being abandoned, you know, I think, but sure, I think I think there's love. I don't know whether it lasts or not. I really don't. Our love for our children is very organic. I mean, I remember when my children are all grown now, but when they were babies, they needed me so badly. In other words, there was nobody else there they would just lie around wet, you know, or scream hungry. So it was a great need, and
the need, the dependency.
That feeling that, you know, you are really quite indispensable to somebody for the first couple of years of their life is, to me, became a very organic thing and affected my whole relationship to them, you know, as time went on.
Do you think that's possible, but also between a man and a woman? You couldn't, of course, be so dependent, but again, trust and a need, fulfilling a need to each other?
I think it's possible, but I think it's very rare. I really do.
Do you think, getting back to the core that we mentioned, that people need to find in themselves, that with the women's liberation movement and all the liberation movements that are going on today for everybody, it's possible to find it at an earlier age, that perhaps the children growing up now have more sense of identity than people who are now in their 40s, and just people in their 20s today might be able to find the same thing that people now in their 40s are finding?
I think it works both ways as I observe young people. It's interesting. I think I have a daughter at college, and I observe her and her friends, and they are in a situation now where it was like in the 50s, where they have to get good grades and they have to get a job because there's so few jobs out there.
Are they back at that?
Oh, absolutely. And all the college.
A complete change
in the
60s.
On the other hand, they have co-ed dorms. They do things in a group way. They have friends. Men and women, young men and women are much closer than we were. It's a much more natural, normal kind of experience that they're having with each other. Many of them have been to Europe 3 and 4 times on student trips. You know, things that people we didn't do. You know, so I think it's two things. I think it's, on the other hand, I've also observed talking to young girls, and they're 20, 24, 25, who've been sleeping with men since they're like 16, and by 24 they're worn out.
Are they?
They want to get married.
Do they want?
They want one man. They're tired because they've had, 10 years of...
So they find that just sexuality isn't enough again?
No, of course not. Of course not. That was on this tour I did for promoting the book. I went to Boston and Washington, and all the program managers of all these stations were all these young, very attractive girls and we would talk about this, and they would say this because it was fascinating to me, because they had so many options. So many sexual options, so many opportunities with men. Many of them were involved with married men. It was a surprise to me, in a sense, to talk to them. But they really, most of them, with good careers and good salaries and apartments, and the cosmopolitan girl incarnate, and they really wanted to get married. They wanted some kind of security.
But they did experiment, find out, and develop before they got married, rather than as perhaps a different generation did not, and then feels the loss of it, always wondering what's on the other side.
Yes.
We only have a few minutes. I want to ask you how long it took you to write Nobody Makes Me Cry, and you developed the characters so fully in conversation. I'll ask you 2 questions at once. Do you remember conversations? Do you take notes? How do you catalog your information? And I'll hold the book up again.
I eavesdrop a lot. I mean, I take notes on backs of envelopes and toilet paper and whatever, on buses and in restaurants, and I have a hard of hearing in this ear, but this is a very good ear, and I take notes. But in the course of my conversations with people, they take over. I mean, I have a whole file of things that I listen to on the streets and so on. But when my characters are interacting, they take over.
You don't even refer to the file. You have it somewhere.
Right. It's all very much out of the unconscious, yeah.
How long did it take you to write the book?
All told, about 2.5 years. It was about 3 years from beginning of the conception. Like I'm writing a book now, and it took a year to gestate.
Question.
Well, because it's the gestation. It's how it just kicks around inside your head, and your unconscious is working with it, and it's a strange kind of process, and all of a sudden it comes in a form. In other words, I outlined this, and I outlined that 3 times.
Did you?
Changed it, yeah, before I actually sat down to.
Did you
really
then
write
follow
it.
your outline once you had changed it?
No. No, because the characters take over, and they start acting for themselves, you know.
Yes, yes, they do. What book are you writing now?
Another novel. I can't talk about it because it'll change
No,
by the
of
time
course.
it's finished anyway.
Is it on the same subject, or would you rather not talk about it at all?
I'd rather not talk about it. It's with a woman protagonist, but it's not the same subject as this at all.
You've also written, I know, before you began your career as a novelist, and your first book was, I'll let you tell.
My first book was called Did You Love Daddy When I Was Born?
Now, before that, you were a journalist, were you not?
Yes, yes. I worked for newspapers for about 10 years, yeah.
Are you writing articles now also? Have you found a very large demand for articles on this subject?
No, I write, as I have a piece coming out in a magazine on envy, for example, and I write what strikes me, you know, and did a piece on teenage sexuality for McCall's, and I've done, you know, all different kinds of pieces, if it's something that really interests me, you know, but when you're working on a novel, you're really sort of zeroing in on that.
I know you are. Now, you say, you told me before the show started, that you have to work I can't think of the word I want, every day.
Yeah,
you can't miss a day
once
on schedule.
Get into it, because I'm not really a very disciplined person, and I am very corruptible and very easily distracted, and I'm a creature of utter extreme, so that when I work, I just have to work. I have to.
You have to discipline yourself.
Totally, totally. You know, so I have to have 8 hours fully, you know, ahead of me, and if I only work 2 out of those, it's all right. I mean, I just won't go out of the house, you know. I learned that from the MacDowell colony, which is a wonderful, wonderful artist colony in New Hampshire, where I finished this book last October. And it's a marvelous kind of atmosphere for writers to work in, and you are, the external discipline, which is like bells ringing, it's like summer camp, you know, for meals, is just enough to give you that kind of discipline, you know.
I thank you very much.
Thank you.
It sounds, I know your next book will be a big success. This one certainly is. Nobody Makes Me Cry by Shelley List, published by Saturday Review Press. Thank you for joining us on Books this evening. I'm Jessie Gray. Have a very good evening.